Clarabelle crouched beneath a broken wagon in the churchyard mud, counting 3 pennies with hands so cold they shook while townsmen laughed above her. Her nurse's bag lay open beside her, nearly empty except for bandages, a cracked bottle of liniment, and the letter that said her train had left without her. Deputy Gideon Hale rode in with frost on his coat and anger in his eyes, fierce enough to quiet a whole street. Yet even he stopped short at the sight of that quiet woman, trying not to cry over the price of bread. When he bent and filled her bag, Clara thought he was buying her shame, not rescuing her life. Before we begin, leave your country name below and tell me where this western night is reaching you. Subscribe if stories of rejected brides, protective cowboys, and hard-earned love keep you listening. The broken wagon had lost its front wheel beside the church steps, and Clarabelle had crawled beneath it for shelter because there was nowhere else in Mercy Falls that would have her. Rain from the night before still dripped from the wagon boards. Mud soaked the hem of her gray dress. A strip of torn calico tied her nurse's bag shut where the buckle had broken. Inside it lay 2 rolls of bandage, a needle case, 1 clean apron folded tight, and the last letter she had received from Mrs. Ruth Whitcomb, the woman who had promised Clara a position nursing a sick child 3 towns west. The train had left at dawn. Clara had missed it by 20 minutes because the wagon carrying her trunk had snapped an axle in the churchyard. Her trunk lay half in the mud behind her, its lid split open from the fall. Most of her clothes were ruined. Her winter shawl had been dragged through a puddle. Her bread money was gone except for 3 pennies. She counted them twice, then a third time, as if shame might add another coin. 3 pennies. Not enough for the train. Not enough for a room. Barely enough for stale biscuits at Jensen's store. If Mr. Jensen decided to sell to a stranger already owing for medicine. Above her, boots stopped in the mud. Well, look there, a man said. The nurse has turned into a mouse. A second voice laughed, crawled right under the wagon. Maybe she means to live there. Clara kept her head down. She had learned in hospitals back east that silence could keep a wound from being made worse. Men laughed harder when a woman answered. Women judged sharper when a woman cried. She tucked 1 penny into her palm and tried to gather the rest, but her fingers were stiff. A pair of polished black shoes appeared near the wagon wheel. Clara knew them without looking up. Reverend Hobbs had spoken to her once that morning, not to comfort her, but to tell her the church could not be responsible for every unfortunate female who came west under uncertain circumstances. Miss Bell, he said, his voice low with public kindness and private distance, I have spoken with several ladies. No household is presently in need of nursing help. Clara closed her fingers around the coins. I understand. You might ask at the boarding house. I dare, Dandy. Her throat tightened. Mrs. Pike requires payment in advance. The Reverend sighed as if her hunger had inconvenienced him. Then perhaps Providence means for you to continue on. The train is gone. Then another will come. In 4 days. A pause followed. Around them, Mercy Falls breathed smoke, mud, and curiosity. The church bell had rung an hour earlier. People should have gone home, but they lingered near the steps, watching the quiet nurse beneath the broken wagon, as if disgrace were a show offered free after service. Then a rider came hard down the street. Hooves struck mud. A dark bay horse pulled up so sharply that the leather creaked. Clara saw the animal's legs first, then spurs dulled by use, then a man's shadow falling over the wagon. Who owns this rig? The rider demanded. No one answered quickly. Clara lifted her eyes just enough to see him. Deputy Gideon Hale was a tall man in a black hat and weathered coat, with a badge pinned to his vest and a face that looked carved out of winter. A pale scar cut through one eyebrow. His jaw was rough with a day's beard. He looked at the broken wagon, the spilled trunk, the watching people, and last at Clara in the mud. Something changed in his eyes. Not softness, not yet, anger. What happened? He asked. Clara tried to stand, struck her shoulder against the wagon bed, and winced. Several men laughed. Gideon turned his head. The laughter died. I asked what happened, he said again. The wagon driver, a narrow man named Pike, stepped from near the hitching rail, rubbing his hands. Wheel cracked. Not my fault. Lady packed too much. My baby, my trunk, weighed less than a feed sack, Clara said before she could stop herself. Pike gave her a smile full of yellow teeth. A sharp tongue for a woman asking favors. Gideon stepped toward him. Did you take her fare? Pike's smile faltered. Fares for the ride. I rode her. Did you get her to the train? Train left. That was not my question. Pike glanced at the watching crowd, then shrugged. No. Gideon's voice lowered. Then give back the fare. I ain't got it. Clara felt the whole crowd lean toward the answer. Her face burned so hot it hurt. It's all right, she whispered. Gideon looked down at her. No, Mom. It is not. He crouched beside the wagon, not caring that mud touched his knee. Up close, Clara saw that his gloves were cracked at the knuckles and his eyes were gray, cold, and tired. He reached for her open nurse bag. She pulled it closer. His hand stopped. I am not taking it, he said. I know what charity costs, Clara answered. That drew a flicker from him, like pain behind a locked door. But he did not explain. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded cloth packet. When he opened it, Clara saw coffee, hard biscuits wrapped in paper, a small wedge of cheese, and a tin cup. Then he took a coin purse from inside his vest and set several silver coins into the bottom of her bag. Clara stared. The sound of metal striking the leather seemed louder than the church bell. You cannot do that, she said. I just did. I did not ask. I noticed. That stung more than kindness should have. Gideon closed the bag and handed it to her. Can you stand? Clara took the bag but did not take his hand. She crawled from under the wagon, mud streaking her sleeves. When she rose, dizziness swept through her and she grabbed the wheel rim. Gideon's hand moved toward her elbow, then stopped as if he had remembered she might not want him touching her. The restraint unsettled her more than his money. Reverend Hobbs cleared his throat. Deputy Hale, surely this matter can be handled without spectacle. Gideon looked around at the gathered townspeople. The spectacle was well underway before I arrived. Mrs. Ada Pike, who ran the boarding house and had refused Clara a room, clicked her tongue. A woman alone ought to have references. I have references, Clara said, from a hospital no one here has heard of. Clara tightened her grip on the nurse's bag. Children with fever do not ask where a nurse learned to cool their skin. That silenced the women nearest her. Gideon studied Clara again, and for the first time she saw something beyond anger in his face. Not pity. Recognition, my bae. As if he knew what it meant to be judged by one ruined hour. He turned to Reverend Hobbs. Where can she sleep? The Reverend glanced at his wife, then at the crowd. The church storeroom is full. It has a roof. It is not proper. Gideon's mouth hardened. It was proper for her to kneel in your mat. A wind moved down the street, carrying the smell of horse sweat, wet wood, and coal smoke from the depot. Somewhere beyond the buildings, a train whistle gave a fading cry. Clara turned her head toward it, and the sound went through her like a door closing. She had been sent west after a patient died under another doctor's hand, and the blame found her because she had no father, no husband, and no money to defend herself. She had taken the position in Mercy County, hoping work would be stronger than rumor. Now the train was gone. The town had measured her, and 3 pennies had told the truth of her worth. Gideon picked up her split trunk as if it weighed nothing. I know a place, he said. Clara stiffened. No. He looked at her. No, she repeated. I have already been mistaken for the sort of woman who follows men for rooms. His expression changed then, just a little. He had made a mistake, and he knew it. His help had landed like a command. "I did not mean my place," he said. "Mrs. Calder's ranch house. She took a fall last month. Needs dressing changed. Pays in food more often than money. But she will not ask you for references before supper." Clara did not answer. Gideon added, quieter, "You can ride a wagon seat. I will ride beside. Door open when we arrive. Mrs. Calder will speak for herself." The crowd waited for her shame to decide. Clara looked down at her bag. Food, coins, a tin cup. Too much to accept, not enough to survive without. "What do you want for it?" she asked. Gideon's eyes went colder. "Nothing. Men always want something." He looked toward the depot where the smoke had thinned into the gray sky. "Yes," he said, "some do." Then he turned away before she could read more. Clara stood in the churchyard mud, her nurse's bag suddenly heavy in her hand, and understood that rescue could feel almost as frightening as ruin when a woman had been taught every open door would close on her fingers. Mrs. Calder's ranch sat 6 miles beyond Mercy Falls, where the road narrowed into ruts between frozen grass and low hills. The wagon that carried Clara there belonged to the sheriff's office, a plain buckboard with a cracked lantern swinging from the side. Gideon drove without wasting words. Clara sat beside him with her bag on her lap and her ruined trunk tied in the back. The wind cut through her damp sleeves. After a mile, Gideon pulled a blanket from behind the seat and dropped it between them. Clara did not touch it. He kept his eyes on the road. "Suit yourself." The words were not cruel, but they were hard, and Clara heard the habit in them. This man did not beg anyone to accept help. He offered her once, then locked the door. After another mile, her teeth began to chatter. She reached for the blanket. A corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. The road dipped past a dry creek bed. A hawk moved in the sky, black against the pale afternoon. Clara watched the prairie stretch wide and empty, all brown grass and winter light. Back east, walls had held sound close. Here, even sadness had room to spread. "You are a nurse," Gideon said at last. "Yes." "Why Mercy Falls? Work? That all?" Clara looked at him. "Yes, that what you ask every woman you find under a wagon." "No." "How many have there been?" "One." Again, almost a smile, though it vanished quickly. She drew the blanket tighter. Mrs. Whitcomb wrote that her youngest had lung fever and needed care. She sent half the train fare. I paid the rest. Whitcomb moved on. Clara's heart sank. "What?" "2 weeks ago. Sold their place to a cattle outfit. Child got better or died, depending which version the store porch tells." Clara stared ahead. No work, no train, no one waiting. She pressed a hand over the bag, feeling the shape of the coins he had placed there. "You knew this in town?" "I suspected, and you did not tell me." He glanced at her. "You were standing in mud with 20 people chewing on your pride. I did not figure that was the hour to add another blow." She wanted to be angry. It would have been easier, but his answer was too plain. They rode another mile in silence. When they reached the Calder Ranch, Clara saw a low house of dark logs, a barn with a patched roof, and smoke rising from a stone chimney. 3 chickens scratched near the step. A blue dress hung frozen, stiff on a line. Mrs. Eleanor Calder opened the door before Gideon knocked. She was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and leaning on a cane, but her eyes were bright. "Well," she said, looking Clara up and down, "you brought me a drowned sparrow." "I brought a nurse," Gideon answered. Mrs. Calder looked at Clara's muddy hem and nurse's bag. "Can you change a bandage without fainting?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you cook plain food?" "Can you sleep under a roof without asking who built it?" Clara blinked. Mrs. Calder stepped aside. "Then come in." Warmth struck Clara first, Then the smell of beans, wood smoke, and onion frying in fat. She nearly swayed from the simple mercy of it. Inside, the ranch house was clean but worn. A table stood near the hearth. A Bible lay open on a shelf. A man's coat hung by the door, though Clara saw no man in the house. Mrs. Calder lowered herself into a chair and lifted her skirt enough to show a bandage wrapped around her shin. "Horse kicked me," she said. "Doctor wrapped it too tight. Leg's been throbbing like a guilty preacher ever since." Clara knelt with her bag. The silver coins inside flashed when she opened it. Mrs. Calder saw them. So did Gideon. Clara's cheeks warmed. She quickly removed her bandages and scissors. Mrs. Calder glanced at Gideon. "You pay her in advance?" "I filled her bag." "With what?" "What she needed." The older woman snorted. "That is not always the same as what a woman can bear." Clara lowered her eyes, pretending to focus on the bandage. Gideon said nothing. The wound was red but not poison. Clara cleaned it with steady hands, softened the crusted linen, and wrapped it again with enough space for swelling. Mrs. Calder watched her closely. "You have done this before?" "Yes, ma'am. On soldiers, some children. Yes, men who thought they knew better. Most." Mrs. Calder laughed, and the sound loosened something in the room. Gideon stood near the door with his hat in his hands. He seemed too large for the kitchen, too severe for the warmth. Clara wondered if he ever sat at a table without listening for trouble. When she finished, Mrs. Calder flexed her foot and gave a satisfied grunt. "You earned supper, might be breakfast too, if you do not steal the spoons." Clara looked up sharply. Mrs. Calder's face softened. "That was a joke, girl. A poor one. Sit down before you fall over." Clara sat. Gideon moved toward the door. Mrs. Calder pointed her cane at him. "You stay and eat. I have rounds. You have loneliness dressed up as duty." "Sit." For a moment, Clara thought he would refuse. His face closed and that cold habit returned. Then he set his hat on a peg and sat at the far end of the table. They ate beans and corn cakes. Clara tried not to eat too fast. Her stomach hurt from emptiness, but she kept her manners as if manners were a wall no one could take. Mrs. Calder asked few questions and accepted shorter answers. Gideon said almost nothing. After supper, Clara rose to wash dishes. "You are a guest?" Gideon said. "I am not." Mrs. Calder looked between them. "She is right. Guests leave. Help stays." So Clara washed and Gideon dried. Awkwardly at first, because he seemed like a man who could face a gun easier than a dish towel. He held a tin plate, wiped it twice, and placed it on the shelf. "You paid too much," Clara said quietly. His hand stopped. "The coins," she said. "Food was enough." "No, it was not. You made me look bought." He turned then. Something flared in his eyes, not anger at her, but at himself. "I made you look seen," he said. "Or thought I did." "That is not the same." "No," he admitted. "It is not." The admission surprised her. Men in authority rarely handed back their mistakes. They buried them under lauders. Clara took the dry plate from him. "I will pay you back." "I know. You do. You have the look of someone who keeps accounts even when the world refuses to." That was too close to truth. Clara turned away. Mrs. Calder slept in the small back room, leaving Clara a narrow cot near the hearth. Gideon went outside after dark to check the barn latch before riding back to town. Clara stepped onto the porch with her shawl around her shoulders. The night smelled of frost and hay. Stars pricked the sky above the black outline of the barn. Gideon tightened his saddle cinch. "Deputy Hale," Clara said. He looked up. "Why did you help me?" His face changed in the lantern light. A shadow crossed it, deeper than tiredness. "My sister counted coins once," he said. Clara waited. He pulled on his gloves. No one stopped, then he mounted. The answer left more questions than it settled. Gideon Hale rode into the dark without another word, and Clara stood on the porch holding her patched nurse bag against her chest, feeling for the first time that the weight of it was not only charity. It was a debt between two wounded people who did not yet know how to speak gently. By the third day at Mrs. Calder's ranch, Clara knew the rhythm of the house. The rooster lied before dawn. The stove smoked until the first flame caught. Mrs. Calder cursed her injured leg every time she forgot the cane. A red cow named Queenie kicked the milk pail if anyone approached from the left. The kitchen window rattled whenever the prairie wind came down from the north. Clara mended, cooked, changed bandages, and slept harder than she had in months. She also learned that Mercy Fall did not forget a story that made it feel righteous. On Monday, Mrs. Calder sent her to town for flour, lamp oil, and medicine. Clara borrowed the smaller wagon and drove alone, her nurse's bag tucked beneath the seat. She told herself she was not afraid, but her hands tightened when the church steeple came into view. Jensen's store smelled of molasses, leather, and cold iron. 3 women stood near the counter, talking in low voices. They stopped when Clara entered. Mr. Jensen glanced at her bag. Mrs. Calder, running a hospital now? I need camphor, flour, and lamp oil. Cash? Clara placed 2 of Gideon's silver coins on the counter. She hated the sound they made. Jensen picked one up, bit it, and smirked. Deputy's money spends fine. A woman behind her whispered, not quietly enough. So that is the arrangement. Before she could answer, the door opened and Gideon stepped in, bringing cold air and the smell of horse with him. He took in Clara, Jensen, the women, and the silver coin still pinched between the storekeeper's fingers. What arrangement? He asked. No one spoke. Gideon walked to the counter. See, I asked. Jensen set the coin down. Just talk. Talk has teeth. The women looked away. Clara felt heat rise in her face. Deputy Hale, I do not need you to fight every whisper. His jaw tightened. There was again the imperfect rescue. He knew how to stop a blow, but not always how to leave a woman room to stand. Clara turned to Jensen. The money's mine until I repay it. The work is mine. Mrs. Calder's leg is healing because I know my trade. If any person here doubts that, they might come watch me clean a wound and learn something useful. One woman flushed. Another found interest in a sack of beans. Gideon looked at Clara and something like respect moved through his stern face. Jensen wrapped the supplies without further comment. Outside, Clara carried the parcels to the wagon. Gideon followed with the lamp oil. I was handling it, she said. I know, you did not. He set the oil down. I am learning. Those 3 words stayed with her all the way back to the ranch. A week passed, then 2. Mrs. Calder's leg improved. Clara's debt to Gideon shrank coin by coin, though he never asked for payment. She kept a ledger in the back of Mrs. Calder's old almanac, writing each amount carefully by lantern light. Gideon came often, sometimes on law business, sometimes because Mrs. Calder sent word of a loose fence or a man seen riding near the south pasture. He never stayed long at first. He brought nails once, then coffee, then a sack of potatoes he claimed had fallen from evidence. Clara did not believe him. One evening, snow began before dusk. Clara stood in the barn with a lantern, wrapping Queenie's cracked teeth with sal while the cow shifted and huffed. Gideon appeared in the doorway, white flakes on his shoulders. She will kick, Clara warned. So will I, if treated wrong. The cow swung her head. Clara almost laughed. Gideon stepped inside and held the lantern higher. The golden light warmed the high loft beams and cast shadows across his face. Without his hat, he looked younger and more tired. You ever smile, Deputy? Clara asked before she could stop herself. He looked startled. When needed. That sounds like a court sentence. Smiling never save much. It saves a little. He watched her smooth the salve into place. You believe that? I believe little things are often all people have. The cow settled. Snow tapped the barn roof. Clara tied the cloth and stepped back. Gideon was quiet so long she thought he would not answer. My sister's name was Ruth, he said. Clara stilled. She was 16, wanted to marry a man my father hated. Father locked her out in November after they argued. She walked to town with a carpet bag and 23 cents. His mouth hardened. I was 19, proud. Thought she would come back by morning. She did not. She was found 2 miles from the bridge after the storm. Clara's breath caught. That is why you helped me. That is why I saw you. Outside, the wind pressed against the barn boards. Clara looked at the man standing across from her. Fierce enough to silence a street. Helpless before a grave that had been frozen for years. You were 19, she said. I was her brother. Both can be true. He looked away. She knew then that Gideon's coldness was not lack of feeling. It was feeling chained down so hard it had become iron. The next Sunday, Mrs. Calder insisted Clara attend church. You cannot hide forever, the older woman said, pinning Clara's clean collar straight. Besides, half that congregation needs nursing, and the other half needs humility. Clara wore her gray dress, brushed clean, and carried her bag, because Mrs. Calder said a nurse should not leave her tools behind. The church smelled of pine boards and damp wool. Gideon stood near the back wall with other men, badged dull in the morning light. Clara took a seat beside Mrs. Calder. Whispers rose, then thinned when Gideon looked over. During the final hymn, a child began coughing. Not a small cough, but a deep, barking struggle that bent him forward in the pew. His mother panicked. The reverend stopped singing. Clara was already moving. She knelt before the boy, opened her bag, and listened to his breath. Steam, she said. Now hot water, cloth, and space. No one moved at first. Then Gideon strode to the stoveroom. Mrs. Calder barked orders. The boy's mother sobbed. Clara worked quietly. She loosened his collar, held him upright, and used steam to ease the tightness in his chest. The boy clung to her sleeve. After long minutes, his breathing softened. The church watched in silence. Clara sat back on her heels, shaking. The boy's mother touched Clara's hand. Thank you. 2 simple words. Clara had not known how hungry she was for them. After church, people approached differently. Not all. Some pride heals slower than wounds. But Mrs. Ellis asked about her baby's rash. Mr. Tate asked if Clara might look at his mother's swollen ankle. Even Reverend Hobbs murmured that Providence worked in unusual ways. Gideon waited outside by the hitching rail. You did good, he said. Clara smiled faintly. When needed, he gave her a look. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. It was small, rusty, brief as winter sun, but it saved a little. Trouble rode into Mercy Falls on a black horse with silver on the bridle and a smile too smooth to trust. Silas Crow owned 3 ranches south of town and wanted the Calder place because it sat over the creek that fed the best winter pasture in the county. He wore fine gloves, carried a pearl-handled pistol, and spoke to women as if every answer had already been bought. Clara first saw him at Jensen's store. She had come for thread and salt, and he stood near the counter reading a notice nailed to the wall. Miss Bell, Jensen said with false brightness. This is Mr. Crow. Silas turned. His eyes moved over Clara's plain dress, her nurse's bag, and the careful way she held herself. The nurse from under the wagon, he said. Clara felt the old mud again. Yes, she said. And you are the rancher from the notice. His smile tightened. The paper on the wall announced a claim against Mrs. Calder for unpaid debt on fencing wire and feed bought during her husband's illness. Clara had known money was tight, but not this. The sum was large enough to swallow the ranch. Silas tapped the notice. Mrs. Calder has ignored fair offers. Law moves when pride will not. Law or hunger? Clara asked. Jensen inhaled sharply. Silas laughed softly. A sharp nurse, Deputy Hale likes sharp things. Makes him feel useful to dull them. Clara picked up her parcels. Deputy Hale does not own my tongue. No, Silas said, but he has been known to mistake rescue for possession. The words followed her back to the ranch. That evening, Clara found Mrs. Calder at the kitchen table. The debt notice spread before her. The older woman's hands looked suddenly old. My husband borrowed after the fire, Mrs. Calder said. Barn burned 3 winters back. Lost hay, 2 horses, nearly the house. Crow lent money before I knew grief makes fools of widows. You can fight it. With what? Beans and pride. Clara looked toward the window where the dock prairie rolled beyond the glass. There might be records, receipts, burned with the Odessa Gideon. Arrived after supper. Mrs. Calder showed him the notice. His face darkened. Crow has been waiting, he said. Can you stop him? Clara asked. Not if the debt is legal. There is always a way men make cruelty legal. He looked at her sharply. And there is always someone who thinks a badge can break any chain. Clara stepped back at the edge in his voice. Mrs. Calder rose with her cane. Do not bring your ghost to my table, Gideon. He went still. Clara had never heard anyone speak to him that way. Mrs. Calder looked at Clara. His wife died because he was late bringing the doctor. He thinks every life since then must be saved by force or not at all. Gideon's face emptied. Eleanor, he said. No, Mrs. Calder answered. You let the whole town think you are stone, because it is easier than admitting stone cracks. Clara could hardly breathe. Gideon picked up his hat. I should go. Stay, Clara said. He did not look at her. I do not stay where I am made a sermon. The door closed behind him. For 2 days he did not come. The weather turned mean. Wind came hard from the north, pushing clouds low over the prairie. Clara worked beside Mrs. Calder, but the house felt colder without Gideon's silent presence near the door. On the 3rd morning, a boy from town brought word that the depot roof had partly collapsed under ice, and the next train might not stop if repairs were not made. Clara thought of leaving. She had enough saved now for a ticket if she sold her 2nd pair of shoes. Mrs. Calder's leg was nearly healed. Mercy Falls had given her work, but also whispers. Crow's threat would only grow. Gideon had stepped back into whatever cold room his grief kept ready for him. She packed her bag before dawn. Not everything, just what mattered. Bandages, apron, coins, Ruth Whitcomb's useless letter, and the ledger of what she owed Gideon. Mrs. Calder found her by the hearth. S.O., the older woman said. You mean to run before breakfast? I mean, not to bring more trouble. Trouble was here before you. Crow used me to insult Gideon. The town watches every step, and I cannot. Clara, stop. Cannot what? Cannot stand needing someone who might vanish behind pride. Clara closed her back. I have been turned out before. It is better to leave while I can still choose it. Mrs. Calder's stern face softened. Child, leaving before they push you is not the same as being free. A knock struck the door. Gideon stood outside in snow, hat in hand, eyes shadowed. Mrs. Calder looked from him to Clara's packed bag. Well, speak before pride freezes all 3 of us. Then she went into the back room and shut the door. Gideon stepped inside. Snow melted on his shoulders. I was wrong, he said. Clara held very still. I have said that twice in my life, he added, poorly both times. That is not an apology. No, he swallowed. I am sorry. The words sounded scraped from a deep place. Clara looked down at her bag. For leaving angry, for helping like command was kindness, for thinking if I could fill your bag, I would not have to ask what you needed. Her throat tightened. He took something from inside his coat and set it on the table. A blackened tin box. I went to the old Calder barn site, he said, where the desk burned. Found this under floor stones near the chimney. Lock broke in the fire. Mrs. Calder came out when she heard. Inside the box were charred papers, brittle at the edges but readable in places. Receipts, a land note, and beneath them, wrapped in oilcloths, bank certificates made out to Eleanor Calder's husband from a cattle sale years before. Mrs. Calder sat down hard. Clara leaned closer. "This is money. Enough to pay Crow," Gideon said. "My bay more." Mrs. Calder touched the oilcloth with shaking fingers. Samuel always hid things too well. Clara felt relief rise, then caution. "Crow will contest it." "He can try." Gideon looked at Clara's packed bag. His face changed, but he did not ask her to stay. That mattered. Instead, he picked up the ledger where she had written every coin owed him. "You kept accounts," he said. Yes, he read the amounts, then looked at her. "You counted the coffee." "It was not mine. It was supper." "It was yours." For a moment, grief, pride, and something gentler crossed his face. "My wife's name was Anna," he said quietly. "She died in childbirth while I rode through a storm for the doctor. The child, too. I got back after daylight." Clara's eyes filled. "I have blamed the storm, the horse, the doctor, God, myself," Gideon said. "Some days I blame anyone who needs me, because I am afraid I will fail them too." Clara stepped closer. "And some days I refuse help, because I am afraid it will be taken back." They stood on opposite sides of the table, the hidden fortune between them, both seeing how much pain could masquerade as strength. Gideon closed the ledger. "Do not leave because of me." "I was not only leaving because of you. I know." He set the ledger down. "But if any part of you is leaving because I made this place feel unsafe," he said, "then I will spend as long as it takes making that right without asking you to forgive me fast." Clara did not answer. Forgiveness, like trust, had to be lived into shape. Outside, the church bell began to ring in town, thin and urgent through the snow. Mrs. Calder moved to the window. "That is no Sunday bell." Gideon put his hat on. "Trouble." Clara reached for her bag. He looked at her. "You do not have to come." She lifted her chin. "I am a nurse." This time he did not argue. He opened the door and waited for her to step through first. The trouble was at the depot. By the time Gideon and Clara reached Mercy Falls, snow had thickened into a white curtain. The train had stopped short of the platform because a freight wagon had overturned near the track. Men shouted. Horses screamed. A stove in the depot office had tipped during the commotion, and smoke pushed from a broken window. Clara jumped down before the wagon fully stopped. "Clara," Gideon called. But she was already running. A child sat in the snow near the platform, blood bright on his forehead. A porter clutched his arm, face gray with pain. Mrs. Pike stood shrieking that her trunks were still inside. Reverend Hobbs tried to organize men, who were mostly getting in one another's way. Clara dropped to her knees beside the child. "Look at me. What is your name?" "Thomas," he whispered. "Good. Thomas, you are going to hold this cloth. Press here, not too hard." She moved to the porter, checked his arm, and saw the break. "Splint. I need 2 straight boards and strips of cloth." No one moved. Gideon's voice cut through the snow. "You heard her." Men moved. For the next hour, Claire worked in the open cold, her nurse's bag at her knees, its contents spread on a feed sack. Gideon held lanterns, lifted debris, carried the injured, and once pulled a drunk man back by the collar when he tried to shove past Clara toward the depot door. "Let me through," the man shouted. "My property's in there." "As so our people," Gideon said. Smoke worsened. A woman cried that her mother was trapped in the waiting room. Gideon tied a wet cloth over his mouth and went in without looking at Clara. Her heart stopped until he came out, carrying an elderly woman wrapped in his coat. He coughed hard, bent over in the snow, and Clara went to him. "Sit," she ordered. "No." She grabbed his sleeve. Do not make your fear look like courage. His eyes met hers. Then he sat. She checked his breathing, furious with relief. You cannot save anyone if you fall. I heard her inside. I know you would have gone. Yes, that silenced him. Then a voice rang from the platform. Well, if it is not the mud nurse playing saint. Silas Crow stood near the baggage car, coat collar high, black horse tied behind him. Beside him was Pike, the wagon driver who had taken Clara's fare. In Pike's hand was a paper. Gideon rose slowly. Clara stood too. Silas smiled at the crowd gathering, despite the storm. Seems Mercy Falls is generous with trust. Before you let this woman touch your children, you might ask why she left St. Bartholomew Hospital back east. Clara's blood went cold. Pike waved the paper. Says here a patient died under her care. Murmurs moved through the depot yard. Gideon stepped forward, but Clara touched his arm. No, she said. He looked down at her. If you answer, they will think I cannot. The storm hissed around them. The child Thomas clung to his mother. The porter sat with his splinted arm. The elderly woman Gideon had carried out breathed beneath a blanket. Clara faced the town. Yes, she said. A patient died in the ward where I worked. His name was Mr. Abel Turner. He was given the wrong dose of laudanum by a physician too proud to read a chart and too connected to be blamed. I reported it. The hospital dismissed me. They said a nurse without family should be grateful for silence. The crowd quieted. Silas's smile thinned. Convenient story. Clara reached into her bag and drew out the letter she had carried from the hospital matron, folded and refolded until the creases were soft. I kept this because shame lies better when truth has no paper. She held it out to Reverend Hobbs. Read it. The Reverend hesitated. Gideon's voice was low. Read it. Reverend Hobbs unfolded the letter. His face changed as his eyes moved over the page. It says, he began, then cleared his throat. That Miss Clara Bell. Dismissal followed her formal complaint regarding unsafe dosing practices. It says her conduct was sober, skilled, and compassionate, though the hospital could no longer retain her due to public controversy. Mrs. Calder, who had arrived with a neighbor's wagon, struck her cane against the platform. In plain language, she told the truth and paid for it. The crowd shifted. Shame moved, not leaving, but changing owners. Silas gave a cold laugh. Fine. She is honest. How noble. Honesty will not pay your debt, Eleanor. Mrs. Calder lifted her chin. It is paid. Silas turned. Gideon removed the recovered certificates and receipts from inside his coat. Filed this morning with Judge Mercer. Witnessed by the bank agent on that delayed train. Your claim is settled. Silas stared at the papers. Those were burned. Not well enough. A murmur passed through the crowd again, sharper this time. Pike tried to slip away. Gideon caught him by the back of his coat. You owe Miss Bell a fare. Pike sputtered. That was weeks ago. Debt does not rot just because the debtor hopes it will. Pike dug into his pocket and slapped coins into Gideon's hand. Gideon did not take them to Clara. He made Pike walk across the snow and place them in her palm himself. The public act mattered. Clara understood that Gideon understood it now. Pike mumbled, sorry. Clara closed her fingers over the coins. For what? He looked confused. She waited. For taking your fare and leaving you, he muttered. For laughing. Clara nodded once. Accepted. Silas' face had gone red with anger. You all think this ends here? That ranch will fail by spring. A widow, a nurse, and a deputy who could not even save his own wife. The words struck like a gunshot. Gideon went still. Every person in the yard seemed to feel the cruelty of it. Clara stepped before Gideon, not because he was weak, but because love, even unspoken, sometimes meant standing where a blow was meant to land. You will not use the dead as weapons, she said. Silas looked down at her. Moo. No. He reached as if to push her aside. Gideon caught his wrists. The movement was swift and controlled, not wild. Gideon's face held fury, but also choice. He did not strike. He did not become the violence Silas wanted. "You are under arrest," Gideon said. Silas laughed. "For touching a sleeve? For attempted assault? Fraud if Judge Mercer agrees, and disturbing emergency scene." Gideon leaned closer. "And because I am finished letting men with money call cruelty business." He bound Silas' hands with leather cord. The town watched the fierce deputy lead the rival rancher through the snow. But Clara saw more than fierceness. She saw a man who had chosen restraint when rage would have been easier. A man learning that protection was not possession, and justice was not the same as revenge. When the injured were cared for and the depot fire smothered, Clara found her bag nearly empty again. Bandages gone. Liniment gone. The biscuits Gideon had first placed there weeks before had been given to Thomas and his mother during the long wait. She sat on a crate beneath the platform roof, exhausted. Gideon came to her with soot on his collar and a bruise forming near his temple. Without speaking, he set something in her bag. She looked inside. Clean bandages from the doctor's cabinet, a new bottle of liniment, a paper packet of tea, and one small coin. Clara looked up. "I know," Gideon said. "Too much?" She touched the coin. "No." He sat beside her, leaving a careful space. For a long moment, they watched snow fall beyond the depot lamps. "I was afraid when you went into the smoke," she said. "I was afraid when you stood before Crow. Then, we are both fools?" He looked at her, and that small, rare smile returned. "Seems likely." She leaned back against the cold wall, tired to her bones, and let the quiet sit between them. It no longer felt empty. Winter settled hard over Mercy Falls, but Clara no longer counted pennies under broken wagons. She counted other things, jars of broth cooling on Mrs. Calder's shelf, clean bandages stacked in a new wooden box Gideon had built without being asked, children who came to the ranch kitchen for cough syrup and left with molasses bread, coins in a proper ledger marked not as debt but as earnings. The hidden certificates paid Silas Crow's claim and left enough for Mrs. Calder to repair the barn roof before the worst snow came. Judge Mercer began an inquiry into Crow's lending practices. Pike kept to honest hauling for a while, mostly because Gideon watched him with patient dislike. Mercy Falls changed slowly, because towns were made of people, and people liked their old sins comfortable. But change came. Mrs. Pike sent for Clara when fever swept through the boarding house. Though she could barely meet Clara's eyes, Clara went. She treated 3 travelers, a kitchen girl, and Mrs. Pike herself. When payment came, Mrs. Pike added a jar of peaches. "I spoke poorly of you," she said. "Yes, I was wrong. Yes." Mrs. Pike looked startled, then gave a small laugh that broke into tears. "You might have softened that." "I might have." Clara took the peaches anyway. Reverend Hobbs preached one Sunday on the sin of public judgment. He did not name Clara, which was wise, but after service he found her by the church steps where the mud had frozen hard over the place she had once knelt. "Miss Bell," he said, "I failed charity when it was most plainly required." Clara looked at the churchyard. The broken wagon was gone. A rut remained. "You did," she said. He bowed his head. "I ask forgiveness." Clara thought forgiveness was a door, not a broom. It did not sweep away what happened. It only opened toward what might happen next. "I will try," she said. He accepted that as more than many men deserved. Gideon waited by the hitching rail, pretending not to watch. He had grown better at pretending, and worse at hiding. On Christmas Eve, a storm rolled in before sunset. Snow struck the windows like handfuls of salt. Mrs. Calder's kitchen glowed with lantern light, crowded with more people than Clara had thought the house could hold. Thomas and his mother came with a pie. Mr. Tate brought firewood. The porter from the depot, arm healing well, brought coffee from the railway office. Even Mrs. Pike sent biscuits, though she did not stay. Gideon arrived late. Clara knew something was wrong the moment she saw him. His coat was white with snow. His face had that old locked look, the one that belonged to graves and storms. "What happened?" she asked. He held a small bundle wrapped in blue cloth. "Found him near the East Road," he said. "Mother dead in a drift, no papers, no name." Inside the bundle was an infant, red-faced and furious, alive by some stubborn mercy. The room went silent. Clara took the baby and felt the fierce little warmth of him through the cloth. Heat water, not boiling. Mrs. Calder, blankets by the stove. "Gideon, sit down before you fall this time." He obeyed at once. They worked together through the night. Clara warmed the child slowly, drop by drop, breath by breath. Gideon sat near the hearth, elbows on knees, hands clasped, staring at the infant as if the past had walked in, wearing another face. Near dawn, the baby slept. The storm eased. People had gone home one by one, leaving only Mrs. Calder asleep in her chair, Clara at the table, and Gideon standing by the window. Pale Christmas light touched the snow outside. "He lived," Clara said. Gideon nodded. "Because you found him." His jaw tightened. His mother did not. "No, I was not fast enough for her." Clara rose and crossed the room. "You were in time for him." He closed his eyes. She stood beside him, not touching, letting him choose whether comfort would be welcome. After a moment, his hand found hers. It was the first time he reached for her without urgency, without rescue, without fear disguised as command. "I do not know how to hold something good without waiting for it to be taken," he said. Clara's fingers tightened around his. "Neither do I." He looked at her then, and his fierceness seemed tired of standing guard. "I love you, Clara Bell," he said. "Not because I found you under a wagon. Not because you needed help. I love you because you tell the truth even when it costs you. Because you make rooms warmer by working in them. Because you stand before cruel men and shaking children with the same steady hands." Her eyes burned. "I have nothing fine to offer," he continued. "I have grief, a badge, a house I hardly use, habits that will likely anger you before breakfast." A laugh trembled out of her. "And I have a fear," he said, voice low, "that if I ask you to stay, I will sound like every person who ever tried to make your choices smaller." Clara looked toward her nurse's bag, hanging by the door. The same bag he had filled in the mud. The same bag she had carried through church shame, kitchen work, sickness, fire, snow, truth, and danger. It was worn, patched, and strong. "You are not asking me to be rescued," she said. "No. What are you asking?" He swallowed. "To build a life. Slow, if you need. Separate rooms, if you need. No vows until you want them. No debt between us." Clara smiled through tears. "That is a very long proposal, Deputy Hale. I am trying not to make it a command." She stepped closer, asked plainly. He took off his hat, though they were indoors, because some reverence lived deeper than manners. "Clara Bell, will you marry me when your heart is ready?" She touched his face, feeling the scar through his eyebrow, the cold of the night still fading from his skin. "Yes," she said, "when my heart is ready." His breath caught. Then she added, "And Gideon." "Yes, it is ready." Mrs. Calder opened one eye from her chair. "About time." The baby woke and began to cry, offended by joy or hunger, perhaps both. Clara laughed, and Gideon laughed too, a real sound this time, rusty and surprised and alive. Spring came late that year, but it came. Clara and Gideon married in the churchyard after the ground softened, not inside where judgment had once stood too clean and polished, but outside near the place where the broken wagon had been. Mrs. Calder gave Clara away because she said family was whoever stayed when staying cost something. Thomas carried wildflowers. Reverend Hobbs spoke gently and did not make the sermon too long. Pike stood at the back, hat in hand, respectful from a distance. Mrs. Pike cried into a handkerchief. Jensen donated sugar for the wedding cake and pretended it had not been his wife's idea. The porter played a cracked fiddle. The baby, now named Samuel Ruth Hale, for 2 lost souls and 1 found future, slept through the vows in Mrs. Calder's arms. When Gideon promised to honor Clara, he did not say, "Protect first." He had learned. He said, "Listen." When Clara promised to walk beside him, she did not say, "Obey." She had learned too. She said, "Choose." Afterward, there was food on long tables: beans, bread, cold ham, apple preserves, and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Clara moved among the people who had once watched her kneel in mud. Some had apologized, some had not, but none could make her small now. Gideon found her near the wagon rut, half covered by new grass. "Thinking of leaving?" he asked. She smiled. "Thinking of 3 pennies. He reached into his pocket and opened his palm. 3 pennies lay there. Clara stared. "You kept them. You dropped 1 in the mud that day." Pike gave back the fare, "But I found this after. The other 2 Mrs. Calder took from your first ledger payment and told me I was too foolish to understand symbol." Clara laughed softly. Gideon placed the pennies in her hand. "I thought we might keep them, not as pain, as proof." "Proof of what?" "That worth was never the same as what the world counted." Clara closed her fingers over the coins. Across the yard, Samuel Ruth began to fuss, and Mrs. Calder called, "Nurse, your son is complaining about the service." Clara looked at Gideon. Their son, not by blood, not by accident, by choice. They walked back together. Gideon's hand rested at the small of her back, light enough to ask, steady enough to answer. The prairie wind moved over Mercy Falls, carrying church bells, horse breath, kitchen smoke, and the far whistle of a train that no longer sounded like a door closing. That evening, after the guests had gone and the dishes were washed, Clara hung her patch nurse's bag on a peg beside Gideon's hat. It was fuller now than it had ever been. Bandages, herbs, a clean ledger, a baby cloth, 3 pennies sewn into a small inner pocket, and a folded paper with her new name written carefully across the top. Clara Bell Hale. Gideon came in from checking the horses and paused at the sight of the bag. "Still too full?" he asked. She leaned against the kitchen table, warm lamplight on her face. "No." He crossed the room, stopping close enough that she could smell snow, leather, and wood smoke on him. "What does it need?" he asked. Clara thought of the mud, the broken wagon, the laughter, the silver coins striking leather like thunder. She thought of pride, apology, storm, truth, and a fierce man, learning gentleness 1 choice at a time. Then she took his hand and placed it over the bag with hers. "Nothing," she said. "It has everything." Outside, the ranch settled under a peaceful sky. The barn stood repaired. The stove held its warmth. A child slept in the next room. Mrs. Calder snored softly by the hearth, with a Bible open on her lap. And in that humble kitchen on the edge of the prairie, a quiet nurse who had once counted pennies under a broken wagon finally stopped counting what she lacked. She had a home. She had a family. She had love, hard-earned enough to last.